bought this working cattle ranch a little over a decade ago, and when they sold us the ranch, they said, okay, you're going to kick the cows off. Where are you going to plant? You're going to plant cab, you're going to plant Pinot, you're going to plant chard. And we said, we're going to ranch cows. Right. And they had a really hard time believing that, because the economy here is people come from all over the world. They were pretty good at doing something else, and then they fall in love with wine country, and so they come here to make wine. But from our perspective, there were already so many incredible winemakers and projects. We didn't think we could add to the conversation. Right. And as environmentalists, we feel that the continued increase in production of wine and wineries is extractive and unsustainable. So we didn't want to participate in that process. Okay. But we wanted to have cows. So we were ranching here, Black Angus, and my wife, Christina, who's a partner in a design firm called Abrico, had been working with Kyle and Katina designing single thread. Okay. And Kyle and I were talking, and he was saying that everything that came into his kitchen came within a 40-mile radius of Healdsburg, except two things: small amount of fish and Japanese A5 Wagyu flown at great expense once a week from Tokyo. And so I said, well, why not America? Why not Northern California? Because it's Eden, everything grows here. And he said that the quality was really inconsistent. And he also felt that a lot of the Wagyu had pushed beyond in terms of its marbling content, in terms of the fat. And he was interested in dialing it down so he could serve it more as a main and less as sort of a sashimi-sized portion. And I was interested in deep ecology and happy cows. Right. And, I said, well, if we have cows which roam more freely, they're not confined to pens the way they were raised in Japan, will that dial down the fat content? Will it dial up the flavor? And so out of that came the experiment, which has become Knights Valley Wagyu.
Mm-hmm. Knights Valley Wagyu. Did you ever dream that it would be where it is now?
I never dreamed about most of what I'm involved in, but
it sort of happened.
Yeah, it sort of happened. Yeah. But the idea was really to find a virtuous agriculture project which would be light on the land and which would support local chefs and create something which you couldn't find anywhere else. You'd have to come to Napa or Sonoma and go to the restaurants and support them and be part of the community. And so that was the impetus for the project. And then for us, we've had a lot of opportunity to expand and grow, but we don't really see any poetry in it. So we are tiny, and we support chefs that are in the kitchen doing great work, and they run up and down the scale. You can get a Wagyu roast beef sandwich today at Troubadour in Healdsburg, or you can get Wagyu at Single Thread or Harbor House, or with Daisy at Bell's. So we don't discriminate as to the formality or the price point of the restaurant. We want to serve all parts of the animal to every community, and we want to be able to show people a different way forward. There's, and I'm not a chef, but there's an idea for the chef where it's sear, plate, veg, serve. And of course that has merit, and it particularly has merit for a certain demographic that's expecting that when they come into a restaurant of a stature. But then there's also all these amazing, fascinating cuts that with more technique, more work, more evolved recipes can really deliver. So we're working with Izakaya Gama in Point Arena, and they do Wagyu Izakaya, and so we sell them organs. And the flavor development that they get there, it's incredibly exciting. So, we're taking lives, we're harvesting animals, and part of the respect for the cow is using the entire animal. And that's not grinding the animal, that's using it in its intact form, cut by cut.
That's amazing.
I don't really know. We're doing our own thing, and we're super local in our whole approach. I mean, in general, you have to be, other than Daisy at Bell's and one chef we love in Carmel, you have to be within bicycling distance of the ranch. When we started, we'd make people bicycle, but it seemed a little militaristic, so we stopped doing that. But depending on how fit you are, and most of our chefs are pretty fit, you can get there. It's an ecosystem, and you know it because you live it on a daily basis. But when we had, we call it the Judgment of Paris. We had 5 chefs doing a blind tasting of our Wagyu when we first came out with our very first harvest, and we went side by side with A5 and Wagyu from Australia, from America. And the chefs uniformly preferred Nice Valley Wagyu. Kyle posted it on his Insta feed. And so from that came Harbor House. And, you realize that all the chefs in Northern California, all their friends, they work together. So it's been pretty organic for us. And then, we'll have a meal. Like, I had my first meal at Bell's and I was totally blown away. So I thought if we could ever talk to Daisy and Greg, and encourage them to work with us, it would be an honor. So it's a pretty straightforward process for us because we're small. We can afford to be pretty ruthless in only working with chefs that are in the kitchen and doing their thing. We don't work with any of the commercial kitchens. We don't work with any of the large scale businesses, and they have merit and they're important, but it's not a position that is appealing to us. I'm a 4th generation New Yorker, so I was born in New York City. So I feel very at home. We spend 6 months a year here, but I'm not from this place. I'm from, I'm from Chinatown. I'm from the West Village. I'm from the Upper East Side. I'm from the West Side. I mean, I'm from the Lower East Side. I'm from all over what is New York. And I've been a foodie and been interested in food and community forever, since I was a little kid. My parents used to take me down the Lower East Side to go for the deli sandwiches, and then we'd go to Chinatown and get pork buns or Peking duck. And so in my heart, I was always passionate about food from the time I could remember.
Right. What did your parents do?
So, my dad was the first in his family to go to college. He got out of the Army and put himself through Columbia Law School on the GI Bill. He became a pretty serious, successful business guy. So I grew up with, in an affluent household. And he paid to put me through undergrad at Michigan, and then I went to Wharton Business School. But when I was 21 years old, he was 49. He said, listen, I'm going to retire and go back and do a master's in 20th century American history. And he said, I'm done. I'm done with the work thing. He came from that generation of people who ground it out because they had to make a living. It was not passion-led. And he said, so there's no money for you, so you got to figure it out. You've got an education, and you're going to have to make your way in the world. And that was the case. He said, I'm going to spend all my money and enjoy my life, which he did. And so,
Did part of you as a young man resent him for that?
Downward mobility's a bitch. It's easy. You talk to people, they say, well, I didn't know I was poor. Like, I was not poor, but then when I became poor, it was pretty painful. So I went through a period of time where I said, what about me? What about me? But I think in the long run, and it worked for he and my mom, I think everybody's got to find their own way. Right. And so I was entrepreneurial from the get. Yeah, it's kind of like, well, when you go to a basketball court and you see one kid who's just got the ball control and it's just easy, business has always been like that for me. It's not that it always worked, but I always got it. So in high school, my last name's Gordon. My best friend's name was Mayerson, so we created Gourmet Enterprises, your complete party helpers. And so we were bartending and catering in high school. I had a herbal salad and iced tea vending cart on Courthouse Square in Dayton, Ohio, where I spent part of my childhood. I was buying and selling cars. I'm still into the car thing, but I was buying and selling cars. I bought and sold a dozen cars by the time I went to college. So I always had my hands in something or a few things. I was always hustling. I was always creating. I was always making things, just sort of forging my own path.
Right. And when you're in school and you get this business, do you have a dream at that point as to what this business will be? Or is your sort of your trajectory is let me make as much money as I can?
Everybody gets noble later in life, but at that point in time when I started out, I wanted to pay the rent, right? And that was the beginning because I didn't have anything to fall back on. But when I was in business school, I took a class in real estate and I loved it. It was just interdisciplinary. I always liked making and creating things, and I saw the opportunity to create physical buildings, and I was excited by it. And then so I built a real estate career since I got out of school, and I was very early because I've always been kind of a curious person. I was very early in a series of businesses and luxury factory outlet stores and very bespoke homes and Amazon warehouses. Now we're building the world's first vertical film studio in New York City with my partner Robert De Niro and Bjarke Engels, the Danish architect. Yeah, so we're always working and thinking and creating. New York is a very vertical city, so we have small pieces of land. So if you imagine a full city block is less than 2 acres, so our solution for the last 150 years has been to go up. Yeah, build up. So LA is less space constrained, so the studio business began to grow, sprawl, right? It's very horizontal, but we had to think about different kinds of solutions. So ours is really just that response to that, and then we also went up because we elevated the whole building, so if there was another Hurricane Sandy event, that it wouldn't swamp our stages. So we lifted everything by a story, and we have parking underneath so that people wouldn't have to park on the street, and we could interact with the neighborhood in a more favorable, less impactful way.
And do you plan on, is there a theater element to it? Is it Broadway-ish, or is it more film, TV, movies?
We're here podcasting, and this is storytelling, right? And so we're interested in storytelling in all forms. So there's serial TV, everything you might watch at home at night on Amazon or Netflix, but then it's AR, VR, and gaming. And we wanted to create an environment where storytellers would do their best work, because all of us who are creative are affected by our environment. And so design matters, and we could create an optimal design not only from a technical or performance standpoint, but also aesthetically, so that you can come in and you're really happy in the morning when you're going to work. It's not just a tired warehouse the way so many of the movie sets appear to be. From the time I was 19, I worked in New York City. So I worked summers and then full-time in New York City in Manhattan. I had a little rent-stabilized apartment on 65th and Lexington where you could hear the bus go by every 7 minutes, and I know because it was relentless. And I was working in finance at the time because that seemed to be the road to riches.
Right, what year was it?
That was I started out of college in 1982.
Right, so it was Wolf of Wall Street time?
That's it. It was suspenders and bow ties and striped shirts, and I remember in my first job out of school, I was wearing suspenders, and I got called into my boss's boss office. He goes, we don't wear suspenders here. We wear white shirts or blue shirts occasionally on Fridays, get rid of the bow tie. And I was thinking, and then I got to get out of here.
But the is causing this much discrepancy.
Yeah, I have never been a great employee. I think you're an entrepreneur not only because you want to, but because you don't have a lot of options. Because I'm the opposite of a company man.
Right. When did you sort of learn that about yourself and say, I'm not going to take this 9 to 5, I'm going to more or less go full-time entrepreneur?
I was working in real estate investment banking for 2 years. And real estate investment banking basically is raising money for real estate projects, buying, selling, financing. And I saw we were making books and our clients were making bucks and they were having more fun and we were all uptight. My boss would rather sit at his desk with a sandwich than have lunch with any of us. And they just seemed kind of miserable. But I saw, I kind of had a peephole into this other life. And so as soon as I could afford to, I took my second year bonus, which I figured would give me a 12-month runway on rent. I went out on my own and started building buildings. And I never really looked back. If you were in New York City, I mean, Bond Street is kind of a 2-block long ode to New York. Il Buco's there. If you're ever in town, it's kind of a East Coast version of Chez Panisse. And across the street is the Bowery Lane Theater building, which I redid. But, New York has many buildings on each block. And so, as exciting and interesting, important as our projects are, we're part of a very, very large ecosystem. I was always bifurcating, meaning that I had a job and a career, but then I was always into other things. For me, it's been nature. That's been my temple. And so I worked at the Audubon Center. I worked at a museum of natural history growing up. I always had animals around. But having some deep connection to nature always mattered. And so, I was doing that. I also was into the car hobby, driving cars, restoring cars, because I enjoyed the archaeology of figuring out a restoration of where a car came from, what the DNA was, and how to return it to that and experience it that way. So I was always kind of going back and forth, and I did that for years in different real estate businesses and different parts of the nature world. And then I ultimately got on the Scripps Institution of Oceanography Directors Cabinet, which is their board of directors. And you get to talk to scientists and get involved in their cool projects. And I was working with them, helping to initiate their 100-year campus master plan. So all that was going on. And at the same time, Christine and I were visiting Napa and Sonoma and coming here. So, and I stashed an old Porsche 911, so we'd come out and kind of like cruise around, and we just fell in love, right? So I saw New York, and I'm equally thrilled when I'm in New York City, building things, creating things, collaborating. But then I come out here and I take off my business helmet, and people are thinking differently. And whereas in New York, the friendships, the relationships tend to be transactional, and that's the city, and that's kind of the beauty of it. You come in with a good idea, and everybody loves you. But out here, instead of being all business, it was no business at all, just for the pure joy of the experience. I mean, we're deep into the food and wine world, so Christina and her partners also owned and operated a restaurant called Public, which was a Michelin star restaurant in Nolita in New York. And so they were owning and operating bars and restaurants and had a lot of relationships in the food and wine world. So Napa and Sonoma, right, it's foodie paradise. Yeah. So we found ourselves going up and down the California coast, but more and more, we kind of found a center of gravity, particularly in Sonoma. We love Napa too, but Sonoma is more artisanal, smaller producers, whether it's on the wine side or the food side. It's a culture of experimentation, and it's also still a little bit hippie out here, which we like, and a little bit rebellious.
That is true.
Yeah, and listen, Napa is the victim of its own success, right? Corporations came in and bought out the entrepreneurs for the most part. And if you go down to Yountville, you see it's chain restaurants at whatever level they're at. And you see big bus parking lots, and it's a thing, and that's great. And it's a window for people to experience wine country, but it's very different. It's wildly different than going to Occidental, to head over to the Sonoma coast and you meet a guy who's making 2,000 cases a year, right, with wild yeast, and he's doing it down in his basement, and most of it is he and his friends and his kids.
Right. So it's got that love.
It does, yeah. It's passion-led.
Right.
So there's kind of two kinds of successful people. There's the guy on the stage who feels like he knows everything, he can do everything. He's his own version of Superman.
Right.
And then there's the other kind of guy who says, hey, I'm pretty good at one thing, maybe two, ask my kids, probably one.
Right.
And when I look at winemaking, it's that thing. So when I look at it, I see not only you see nature and you see the intervention of God in this living thing in a bottle, but I see technical skill and passion, but it's a lot harder than it looks. And a lot of people come into the valley with this fantasy of paint by numbers winery, right? Where you've got a paint kit and each piece is numbered, and Thomas Rivers Brown is number 8. So, okay, I'm going to hire him, and then I'm going to buy a piece on Howell Mountain, and I'll check that box, and then I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to become Bill Harlan. Well, the fact of the matter is you're not. You're not. You're not going to be Peter Michael. You're not going to be Aubert. You're certainly not going to be the Kistler family. It is so hard to do. And these people are so talented and inspired. And, there's kismet, right? There's luck of finding that right, whatever the juju is, where their wines are totally next level. And so we herald them. We love Nice Valley Wagyu is the complement to what they're doing, but by no means did we ever have a sense we were going to come into wine country and make wine. For me, there's many places in the world I go. I visit. I'm glad I went. You go to Turkey, you go to Morocco, and you go, this is incredible culture, people. Maybe I learned something. Maybe there's some idea or visual that I'm going to bring back with me. But then there's these really rare places where you say, I've got to get back there, like ASAP, stat. And Napa and Sonoma for us were those places. And so we started camping out at Meadowood in the summertime and had a place there. And then we'd go to Indian Springs because the hot springs and John Merchant were there up in Calistoga in the wintertime. We went to a whole bunch of other hotels to just kind of check it out. But about 12 or 13 years ago, we just said, we got to get a place here. Christina spent part of her childhood in Pleasanton, so she was also a Californian, and her family's from Southern Oregon and San Diego, so she was kind of a West Coast girl as much as I was an East Coast guy. And we just settled in here, and we were looking around, and we wanted to build our own home, so we designed this house ourselves. And so we wanted a beautiful piece of land where we could be in nature. And so one day we were kind of frustrated because the brokers were showing us these megas, big public houses for public display of consumption, and we're pretty private people. And so we met a broker named Henry Schlangen, who's a local guy. He was a fly fishing guide, and he's from here, grew up in Geyserville. And Henry said, okay, let me just take you out and show you my favorite place on earth and see what you think of it. So we hopped in his pickup truck, and Henry was wearing his cowboy boots, and he took us to Knights Valley. And it was mostly cattle ranches, but yet it was in the middle of things between Calistoga and Healdsburg. And I said, this is it. So from there, over the next year or two, we homed in. We found a property that was owned by Jane Campbell. Her family owned most of this side of the road at one point in time, one of the old San Francisco families. And as they needed dough, they were selling off, pieces, 100 acres here, 200 acres there. And we were the last piece they had to sell off, 227 acres. And so I'm forever grateful to Henry and John Pelkin for helping us find this.
Okay.
These 227 acres have been part of a working cattle ranch for over 100 years. And so the site where our house is now was where they used to feed the cattle. So they would dump spent beer grain or other feed, and the cows would just come up here. There was no well, no road, no infrastructure. We just started coming up here and spending time. We'd take a couple of folding chairs up here and just see which way the sun came up and where the wind went at night, and just learn the aspect of the property over time and in different seasons. So we knew we didn't want to rush, because the design work that we've done and all the residential work I did was in New York City, and New York City is urban. It's completely different. So we tried to approach this with a lot of humility towards what the land was telling us it wanted. And what we designed here was sort of a modern version of a barn. So it's an agrarian structure, which we felt would be at home on the landscape and not be another mega. I march the beat of my own drummer, I guess I would say, as does my wife, but not to be overtly different, just because we get curious about things and we hop down rabbit holes and we start reading and thinking and dreaming, and this is the result of it. So it's not out of any kind of commercial impulse. It's really just to, scratch our own itches.
Yeah. Very cool. How'd you meet her?
I had been developing a couple of properties on Bond Street, which is, it's this magic little street I mentioned earlier. And I heard that there was a college bar opening up. And so the community board was going to come out in a meeting, and the community boards in New York City are really popular, to crucify them. So, because there was a woman named Jane Jacobs who talks about the urban dance, which is all these different uses, different times of day, different atmospheres, and out of that variety, out of that energy, comes the life of the city. It's like a pond, right? You've got little fish and crayfish and plankton and plant life, and that's the ideal city. And it's a delicate balance, and when you go too far in one direction, you can lose what makes these places special. And so I didn't want a college bar in there, so we go into this church. It was summertime. It's hot, and the community board is filled. It harbors all the crazies. And as I was waiting to talk, I see this very attractive blonde. And so I kind of mosey over there and start talking to her. And I think that I'm doing really well. Probably it was a very unobjective view. And so I finally started talking to her. I'm like, oh, what are you here to do? And she's like, well, we own and operate a Michelin star restaurant. We want to open another venue on the street. I'm like, wait a minute. This is the college bar? And so I got up to speak, and I said, listen, I'm here to speak out against the application, but not the applicant. And then I invited her to dinner, and for whatever reason, she said yes. So that was the beginning.
Okay.
in the Crucible, and we turned them down there, but they found a better location a block away where they opened Saxon and Parole. Yeah, which is in business for years. So we met under unusual circumstances. So we've been together a little over 16 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And Abraco's unusual in that it started out with 4 college buddies who adored each other. And when I met them, they had a burgeoning hospitality design business, but they were still like, I call them kittens in a basket. They still wanted to hang out all the time and drink together and party. And so each of the partners at Public would have one night a week where there would be one night a week where you'd kind of hold down an end of the bar. And so Christina's was Wednesday night and Williams was Thursday night, but they liked each other so much they'd be there all the other nights.
Right.
and after Christina and I got together, I would periodically have to explain to somebody's, William or Adam's girlfriend, like, if you want to be with them, you got to understand you're joining a commune. Right? So it's not, we have very non-traditional ideas of socializing. We're monogamous, so don't get me wrong, but we have not non-traditional ideas of no, all the time. And, I have 2 sons, and I mentor at the schools and people who are interested in maybe doing things a little bit differently. But I think, the opportunity, like for me out here, is not about scale. It's not about building another business. It's really about supporting the effort of other passionate creatives like me. And the interesting thing is, we're in a very polarized time. Like, we all have a lot in common. Like, I meet all the chefs and the winemakers, like, we're so much alike, all the car guys. We all came out here because we fell in love and we didn't have a choice in the matter. Right? There's no deeper hospitality culture than out here. People come over with a couple bottles of wine or something they baked or something they fermented or their friends gave them, and it's just, there's generous impulses and it's very unforced. And I only wish for people when they come out here to realize what lies below the surface when you scratch it. Because people come out and they go, oh, there's wine tasting in some restaurants. We're like, yes, there is all those things, but then there's all the reasons that we love the Valley, right? Going for a hike and meeting people, or, Matt Morris makes his Nocino, all these crazy projects that people are doing, all their little side hustles they're doing evenings and weekends.
Shout out to Charbonne.
That's it. And it's just something unique and different. We had a project we called the Shiner Concern. So we were drinking one night and we said, well, why do people select the wine they do? And is it a lot of people feel insecure around a wine list. And so, they'll pick something that's kind of like not the least expensive, or they'll pick something that's got a Robert Parker score. And we said, well, what happens if we were to take away everything that you know about wine? How would you select it, and how would you think about it if it's on a list? So I went around and I met with 42 different vineyards and their winemakers, where they had finished wine that was Robert Parker 90 plus that they would allow us to private label, just 50 cases of red and 50 cases of white. And I said, we'll never reveal your name to anybody, but we wanted to put it on the menu. So we went through and we got something that said the Shiner Concern, and we got a legal label, and we put this out there. And then we had the Psalms at Public and Saxon and Parole try to sell this wine. And it was original restaurant retail was about $65 a bottle, which was kind of right in the strike zone. And what we found is, without an intensive hand sell, we couldn't sell a bottle of it, because we realized that it wasn't what was in the bottle that was selling the wine. It was people, right? It was story. It was area. It was how did how did it resonate? But it was also, what did your friends think of a bottle, or how did the Som experience the bottle? Once we brought story back in, and it was our story about, thinking about wine and how you would approach it, then we ended up selling it. But it was, it was like a little learning experience, a little test tube for us. Right. I can tell you now, it was Realm before they got their scores. Yeah, it was Benoit and Juan Mercado. This happens all the time, where you'll talk to a real estate broker and he'll come over with something, you don't recognize the label because there's hundreds and hundreds, and he'll go, well, I did a deal on Howell Mountain and the client was really happy with me. He goes, if I can ever do anything for you, he goes, you know what? I'd actually like block 10, row 4. Just hit me up. I need enough for one barrel. Yeah. And that's going on all the time. And then the wine's exquisite, and there's just so much passion in it. And it's this evanescent moment in time where you just get it that once, because he's probably never going to make it again. Right. No, and it's remarkable too, because you put so much heart and passion, but also technique into what you do, but yet you eat it and it's gone, right? It's kind of like, It's the cycle of nature is like that. It's impermanence. Yeah. And then you get an opportunity, hey, maybe I'll just shift this or try something else and see how it works. And if it doesn't, it's okay. Right. You could just move on and try it again. We hire a lot of athletes because there's an athlete's personality. One part of it is, and it's like a chef, you're raptors, right? You're hawks, right? You see the sparrow and you go and you dive bomb, you're going to go for it, and with a single-mindedness. But also athletes understand there's a lot of training, and then you go out and compete, and hopefully you're going to win more than you lose, but you're going to lose plenty, and you got to pick yourself up after a competition and then just focus on the next one. What did I do well? What could I have done better? And then you move on. But what I always try to do is, I'm really interested in running a good process, because if I run a good process, the results may or may not be the results that I wanted, but I'm ultimately triangulating in on something. So I'm a lot less tied to success or failure, and I'm more tied to what the daily process and system looks like, and am I optimizing for that? So you just become, it's about attachment, right? You just become less attached to what that result is, because it's so temporal anyway. So the land was being very intensively overgrazed. There probably were 3 times the number of head of cattle as there are today. And it was pretty clear to me it was very chewed up. It's a beautiful ranch with mature oak trees, and one of the reasons that it was never converted into vineyards, it's got some hilly topography, all the things that make it interesting to us now. So I moved all those cows off, and then we introduced cross fencing for rotational grazing, and then let the ranch rest through a rainy season. So just took about 4 months, and all of a sudden it was like one of those cartoons where all the animals pop out, right? And they're like, hey, dude, we're back. And then you see the bobcats, and you see the coyotes and fox, and the raptors came back, and the bird life just exploded. And then we introduced a sustainable number of Angus cow-calf pairs. And listen, people talk, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what ranching is at this scale. This is the best way to reduce fire hazard in wine country. By grazing appropriately, we reduce brush and fuel load buildup, which propels these massive fires. And fires have always been a part of the land, always going to be a part of the land. But by keeping cows on, what we're doing is enable us to kind of simulate the large herds of herbivores that we've had since the beginning of time. I was very inspired growing up working at a place called Allwood Audubon Center, and it was, I think, about 70 acres, and it had different ecosystems. And we would walk around there, and I'd go in, and I'm like, "There's nothing here." And then I would go out with Paul Knoop, the head naturalist. He's like, "Just stop for a minute, be silent, stop talking, just open your ears." And all of a sudden, like, there was nature everywhere. And so the dream was to have a piece of nature, and also to understand that raising cattle or something else, having some ag project, is not mutually exclusive with habitat restoration, with improving soil health, with acting in a way which is very low impact in terms of, we don't add pesticides or anything like that. We don't use very much water at all. So acting in a sustainable long-term way can be completely compatible with supporting the food community.
When did you move from Black Angus to Wagyu?
So this happened, we still have Angus on the back of the property. At some point will be all Wagyu, but I started talking to Kyle about the project, I guess maybe about 4 years ago. And then we've been, slowly increasing the herd, because we grow the herd with our own bull sort of on site at this point. And we want to make sure that we keep a tiny production, so that you have to come to Sonoma or Napa or go to Bell's to get our food. And so we're not really interested in growth.
Okay.
So I know it sounds communist, but it's true. It's the poetry of it. I don't think, it's like if you want to have a really remarkable meal, Troubadour serving dinner, 14 diners, 3 or 4 mostly single thread and other incredibly well-trained people, and just the joy of the cooking for a small number of people. It's almost like it's in your own kitchen, and sometimes Sean will be in there and he'll come out and serve and drop a plate.
Right.
And it's just, it's so elevated, and it's really, it's the kind of, these are the reasons that we're here.
Yeah.
Retail apocalypse has been talked about a lot in terms of all the suffering and the challenge, but it's also one of the great opportunities for chefs of the last couple decades, because we had gotten to a point before the pandemic where the landlord was the chef's partner, and he was really deep in his pocket.
Yeah.
And so when you get to that point, the natural response for a chef is a lack of experimentation, because you got to be very risk managed, right? High cost entrees, it's the salmon, it's the half chicken, it's the sirloin. But by washing out 20-30% of the restaurants that shouldn't have survived anyway, they were mediocre, and all they did is take market share away from the great restaurants, but also by reducing rent in a very considerable way, you see this wave of experimentation, this excitement, and an opportunity for chefs to play and to think about the projects without having to focus on these massive rent expenses. And I think it's a renaissance, and it's such an exciting time in the restaurant business.
It really is.
Well, there's also, and listen, this is no news alert, chefs have big egos. I mean,
Oh, for sure.
right? And so PPP money and the pandemic allowed some chefs that really wanted to get out of Dodge to get out, egos intact, because they say it wasn't me. You could point to kind of them. So it was a very healthy kind of flushing of the system. Yes, it was really difficult. Of course, the business cycles are difficult, but I think also it's allowing a lot of new talent to rise, and to really exhibit and to demonstrate all the creativity they have in a way that they couldn't before.
That's right. Actually, that's that.
And ultimately, today, chefs are compensated for it.
Yeah.
It's a mainstream idea. People want food raised on healthy soils,
Yes.
right? They'll pay for it. They'll allocate their resources more towards chefs that care about these ideas. And so you have to be a lot less of a preacher than you used to have to be to come out with those ideas and feel like your market's going to support you.
Right.
It's a time when understanding business has never been more important for a chef. Not only raising capital, which is always a challenge in this current environment, but also operating a business, understanding HR, understanding that it's a different world for chefs, and it's vital to have respect for all of the people that you work with and this sort of ecosystem you inhabit together in your own kitchen. But I think that's what makes it exciting. It makes the career much more broad. It's a lot more than handling knives.
Right.
So, there's an idea as we become adults that we're not our thoughts.
Right.
And if we start to do the inner work, and we're all dealing with childhood trauma, we all have learned a lot of lessons from our parents and others that we later discovered aren't serving us, to start being self-aware and say, hey, maybe I had a little too much coffee and I maybe my fuse is a little short today, or right? Or maybe there's something going on in my life and it's entering, whether it's my kitchen or the ranch, and I got to take a little time and breathe and exercise or get some sleep or whatever it is that needs to be done. But I think, all of us are in a moment where we have the opportunity to be slowing down a little bit, but just being a little more self-aware, and taking our cues differently. And because a lot of this behavior, and it's epidemic in my world, in the business world in New York, which is pretty sharp-elbowed for a lot of people. It can be in the kitchens. Like, my question is always, does it serve me? Right? Is it what I want to send out in the world? Is it how I want to treat my people? Is it the example I want to show as a leader? Is it natural, right? And how do I feel at the end of the day if I'm behaving that way? Certainly nothing I would ever be proud of.
Right.
Well, I don't know. I think people tend to correlate the wrong things.
Right.
A lot of people may be successful in spite of. We have a rule in business. I don't know if you speak French, but it's no assholes. It's just not worth it.
Right.
It's just not worth it. The world's big. Nobody is indispensable. Not us, not anybody else. So we want to be kind, and we expect kindness as a baseline for behavior. And it's unremarkable. Things work out. I mean, you saw even when we were out with the Wagyu, like, we don't yell, we don't kick, we don't come in there. We just want to be very chill, because the animals are happier, we're happier, and it's more compatible with the way that nature is anyway. I kind of divide my world into two pieces. In New York, I'm really excited about what's next and having an impact. And so we're going to shift our whole business. So we built Amazon's first modern e-commerce warehouse in the city. We built their first vertical warehouse. We're building this first vertical film studio. But I'm thinking about what's next, and I'm going to shift our whole business again with my team into have more impact. We're going to go into multifamily. It's no secret, because there's a housing crisis, and people have to have these ungodly commutes to get to work. And not all hours in the day are created equal. That last hour is the hour to spend with your family. It's exercising, it's learning, it's socializing, whatever it is. So we want people to be able to live closer to where they work, and we want to be a part of that. But then when I come out here and take my business helmet off, I want to play. And the idea is not to grow. We have Knights Valley Wagyu. If the chefs continue to feel like it has value, we'll continue to do it. And I want to come out and drive cars and hang out with my wife and friends and our Pekingese and our donkeys and have a good time. So I would say out here I'm wholly unambitious. Well, I would say it starts in the morning. If I'm going to meet car buddies, we'll probably go over to Sam's in Calistoga. There's a lot of good roads that we can hit from there, or we'll come over here. I'm in Troubadour a lot, too much, if there is such a thing as too much. I'm there a couple times a week. I just adore everything about what Sean and Melissa do and their food and the experience. We love Handline in Sebastopol for their cauliflower tacos. We go to Charter Oak regularly. I'm looking forward to trying the new Chichios. Yeah, Diavola is right up here in Geyserville, so we find ourselves there a lot. And then, other than that, we like to support all of the non-chain, non-institutional restaurants that are part of the Napa, Sonoma area. I'll go down and we love Altamont General Store and Occidental. We'll go down there for breakfast or lunch, and then you can head off to the coast, and the driving roads are spectacular. So it's all a part of what we're doing on the daily.